My name is Dana Calloway. I'm 36 years old. And 3 days before my company went public on the New York Stock Exchange, my mother called to let me know that coming home for Thanksgiving in November would have been fine, but Christmas was going to be a smaller gathering this year, and I should understand. She used the word smaller the way she'd always used it. Like it was about the guest list. It wasn't about the guest list. I stood at my kitchen window in Chicago with the phone pressed to my ear and watched a delivery truck make 3 attempts to parallel park below me. I didn't say anything for a long time. I had learned, over the years, that silence was the only response that didn't give her something to work with. Dana, are you listening? I'm listening, Mom. Garrett just needs this one to be low-key. He's going through a hard stretch. You know how the holidays get for him. I did know how the holidays got for Garrett. I had been knowing for 32 years. Okay, I said. Tell him I hope things ease up. I hung up. I put the phone face down on the counter and stood there for a minute with my hands flat on the granite, the way you press your palms down when you're making sure the floor is still solid. Then I picked up my coffee, opened my laptop, and pulled up the S1 filing I had been reviewing since 5 that morning. The IPO was in 72 hours. My family had no idea. If you're new here, go ahead and hit subscribe right now before we go any further. I post new stories every week and you are going to want to be here for what comes next. Now, let me take you back to where this actually started. Underscore 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 underscore. December, 8 years earlier. I was 28. I had just left a senior product role at a software firm in Chicago, good salary, decent title, the kind of job my mother described to her friends at church as Dana does something with computers. I had a savings account, a 2-bedroom apartment I was subletting the second room of, and an idea I had been carrying around for 4 years like a stone in my coat pocket. The idea was for a compliance automation platform, a way for mid-size financial services companies to manage regulatory documentation without a team of 6 people and a filing cabinet the size of a refrigerator. I had seen the problem from the inside. I had also, quietly, spent 18 months building a prototype in the evenings after my day job was done. I flew home to Columbus for Christmas that year with a pitch deck on my laptop and the kind of nervous energy you have when you're about to do something that can't be undone. At dinner, I tried to explain what I was building. My father said, "Is there really a market for that, though?" My mother said, "What about benefits?" "You're giving up benefits?" Garrett said, "Compliance is boring. You should do something consumer-facing. I know some guys who could intro you to investors if you want to go that route." He said this while reaching across the table for the bread basket, and he said it in the tone of a man doing me a very small favor. Garrett had started 2 companies at that point. Both had closed within 18 months. My parents had helped fund both. They called it investing in the family. I drove back to Chicago on December 26, stopped at a gas station outside of Gary, Indiana, and sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes. Then I called Simone Abera. Simone was a corporate attorney I had met at a conference 2 years earlier. She was 43, precise, and had a way of making you feel that every problem was solvable if you were willing to do the boring work. I had stayed in touch with her because she was one of those people who returned calls and meant what she said. "I'm going to do it," I told her. "I want to file the entity this week." She said, "Have you drafted the founder agreement?" "I'm working on it. Finish it before New Year's. And Dana, get the IP assignment signed the same day you form the company. Don't let that slip." I didn't let it slip. January 3rd, the entity was filed. January 3rd, the IP assignment was signed, notarized, and in Simone's hands before noon. The patent application for the core architecture went in 11 weeks later. I didn't tell my family any of this. Not because I was hiding it, I wasn't, exactly. I just understood, the way you understand certain things about the people you grew up with, that they would manage to make it about Garrett somehow. And I needed one thing in my life that had nothing to do with Garrett. That was 8 years ago. Underscore 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 underscore. The S1 had taken 14 months to prepare. The roadshow had taken 6 weeks. The pricing had been set 2 nights before at $18 a share, which was the number Owen Bryce, our lead underwriter, had told me to feel good about, and which I felt nothing about because I had stopped feeling things about numbers the week I had stayed awake for 50 hours reviewing the risk disclosures. Simone called at 7 the morning after my mother's call. How'd she take it? She asked. She didn't know about it. I didn't tell her. A pause. When are you planning to tell them? I was thinking the bell ringing might do the telling. Simone made a sound I had come to recognize as her version of a laugh. Dana. You cannot let your family find out your company went public from the news. I know. I set down my coffee. I'll call my dad this week. Today or tomorrow. Not this week. She was right. She was always right about timing. I told her I would call him that afternoon, and I started to, and then at 2:14 my phone rang first. It was Miles, my cousin. He was calling from Columbus. Hey, he said. I don't know if this is a thing or not, but I was at my parents' place last night and Garrett was there. He paused. He was talking about your company. I went very still. What did he say? He said, Miles stopped. He said you two built it together. At the beginning. That he was there for the whole first year. I sat down. I picked up a pen. I wrote the time, 2:14 p.m., on the notepad by my phone, the way Simone had taught me to do whenever something needed to be documented. Who else was in the room? I asked. My parents. Uncle Frank. And, he paused again. A reporter, Dana. Some guy Garrett went to Ohio State with. He had a recorder on the table. I didn't answer right away. Outside, the city was doing its ordinary afternoon things, a bus, a siren somewhere east, a pigeon on the window ledge looking at me with absolute indifference. I had spent 8 years building something clean and documented and entirely mine. And my brother had just started talking to a reporter 3 days before it went public. I called Simone before I even put the notepad down. She picked up on the first ring, which she only did when she had already been thinking about a problem. I had learned to notice that. Miles just called me, I said. Garrett gave an interview. On the record. He told someone we built the company together. Silence. The specific kind Simone used when she was organizing her response before she gave it. How long ago? Last night, according to Miles. I don't know if it's been filed anywhere yet. Okay. Forward me Miles's contact information. I'm going to need his exact account in writing. Do you have any idea who the reporter is? Ohio State connection. I don't have a name yet. Find it. Don't call Garrett. Don't call your parents. Don't post anything, comment on anything, or respond to anything in writing until I tell you to. She paused. Dana, I need you to hear me clearly right now. Your patent is sole inventor filed. Your founder agreement is signed and dated. Your IP assignment predates the company formation by 6 hours because we did it in the right order on purpose. He has nothing. But he can still make noise, and noise 3 days before bell ringing is the one thing we cannot afford. I know. Do you? I know, I said again, more slowly. Good. Call me back when you have the reporter's name. I hung up and sat at the kitchen table for a long moment. The coffee had gone cold. I hadn't noticed. I thought about the Christmas dinner 8 years ago, Garrett with the bread basket, his easy generous voice. I know some guys who could intro you, and I thought about all the times since then I had given him a version of the company that would satisfy his curiosity without giving him anything real. The product roadmap I described in vague terms. The funding rounds I mentioned only after they closed. The patent I had never once brought up at a family dinner. I had not been secretive because I expected this. I had been careful because I understood my brother, and I understood that what he wanted from my success was not to share it, it was to be adjacent to it. To be the person who could say he had been there. I opened my laptop and searched the Ohio State Journalism alumni directory for 40 minutes before I found him. Craig Fowler. Staff writer, Midwest Business Journal. His most recent byline was a profile of a logistics startup in Cincinnati. His second most recent was a feature on family-founded companies and the dynamics of shared credit. I stared at that headline for a moment. Then I forwarded everything to Simone. Underscore 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 underscore. She called back at 4:30. I could hear traffic behind her. She was walking, which meant she was thinking hard enough that she needed to move. Craig Fowler has a piece in draft, she said. My contact at the Journal confirmed it's flagged for pre-IPO publication. They're planning to run it tomorrow morning. My stomach dropped exactly half an inch and locked there. Can we stop it? Not directly. We can't call the paper and ask them to kill a story, that creates its own problem. What we can do is get ahead of it. She stopped walking. I could hear the wind cut out, like she had stepped into a doorway. I'm going to send a letter on firm letterhead to the Journal's editor tonight. Factual, not threatening. It will state that the sole inventor patent, the founder agreement, and all company formation documents on record name you as the single founder. It will note that any characterization otherwise is inconsistent with the public record. We are not asking them to kill the piece. We are simply ensuring that if they publish with full knowledge of the documented facts. Will that work? It will work enough. She paused. How are you doing? It was the only time she ever asked me that, and she only asked when she genuinely wanted to know. I thought about how to answer. I'm fine, I said. The kind of fine that takes some practice. Yeah, she said. I know that kind. Then, back to business, Dana, there's something else. Miles told me something when I reached him this afternoon. He said Garrett mentioned an equity claim. Informal, apparently he used the word understanding, but Miles said he used it more than once. The word landed the way certain words do, not loudly, but with weight. He doesn't have a claim, I said. He does not have a claim, Simone confirmed. But he may be preparing to make noise as if he does. Which means your family is about to call you. Underscore 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 underscore. My father called at 6:17. I knew before I picked up, from the time alone, my father had always reserved the early evening for the calls he had rehearsed. Dana. His voice was careful. Measured. The voice he used when he was being a father and a reasonable man simultaneously, which had always been the voice I trusted least. I want to talk to you about something before things get complicated. Okay, Dad. Your brother feels like he contributed to the early foundation of what you built. He's not asking for anything dramatic. He just feels like there should be some acknowledgement. Something that reflects the family piece of this. What family piece? A pause. He was there for those early conversations. He made introductions. He gave you his time when you were starting out. I thought about Garrett's time. I thought about one phone call in year 1 where he had told me my pricing model was too conservative and that I should consider pivoting to a subscription model, which I was already on. I thought about the introduction he had made to an investor friend of his who had taken a meeting with me, talked for 45 minutes about his lake house, and never followed up. I thought about the bread basket. Dad, I said. Garrett wasn't involved in building this company. He's not in any of the founding documents. There's no equity to acknowledge because there's no basis for one. Dana. I'm not angry. I want you to hear that. But I need you to understand that what he's been telling people isn't accurate, and I need it to stop before it becomes a problem I have to address publicly. A long silence. Then, he says he has emails. I picked up my pen. I wrote the time. 6:24 p.m. What kind of emails? From the early days. From you. He says they show a collaboration. I kept my voice flat and even. Forward them to Simone Abera. You have her contact. Dana, this doesn't have to go through lawyers. This is family. Dad, it's already through lawyers. Garrett talked to a reporter. This is already public. I stopped. Please forward the emails to Simone. He said he would think about it. He hung up without saying goodbye, which was the thing he did when he was disappointed in me and wanted me to know it. I had been watching for it my whole life, and I still felt it land somewhere in my chest the way I always had. I sat there for a minute. Then I opened the company's S1 on my screen, found the founder certification page, and read my own name until the feeling passed. The emails Garrett had were real. I knew that before my father finished the sentence. I had sent them. In year 1, when I was still trying to include my brother in small ways, I had sent him a handful of updates, rough revenue projections, a product summary, a note asking for his gut reaction to a pricing tier. Friendly, informal, the kind of thing you send a sibling when you're still hopeful about what the relationship could be. I hadn't thought about those emails in 6 years. But I had a feeling Garrett had been saving them for exactly this moment, and I had no idea yet what they actually said. That was the thing keeping me awake when Simone called back at 9:15 and told me the Midwest Business Journal had just confirmed to her contact that the piece was running at 6 the next morning. I didn't sleep much. Not from panic, I had moved past the kind of fear that keeps you staring at the ceiling somewhere around year 3 of building the company, when I had learned that most problems either had a documented answer or they didn't, and if they did, the document was what mattered. I lay awake because I was thinking carefully, which is different. At midnight I got up, made tea, and pulled up every email I had ever sent Garrett from my personal account. I read through them the way Simone had taught me to read anything that might become evidence, slowly, without reacting, looking for what was actually there rather than what I feared was there. There were 11 emails over 14 months. The last one was dated March of my second year. They were friendly. They were informal. One of them used the word we. I had written I think we're on to something with the mid-market angle in a note about a customer discovery call I had done alone, in a coffee shop in Lincoln Park, on a Tuesday afternoon while Garrett was at his own job in Columbus. The we was the kind of loose, affectionate we that people use when they are feeling good about something and want to share it with someone they still love in the uncomplicated way you love people before they disappoint you in the specific ways only family can. I wrote the word we and Garrett saved the email for 8 years. I forwarded the full thread to Simone at 12:47 a.m. with one line, "These are all of them. Read the third one." She responded at 1:03 a.m. with 4 words, "Already handled." Go to sleep. I did not go to sleep. But I did stop reading emails. Underscore 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 underscore. The piece ran at 6:04 a.m. I had set an alert. The headline was, Family Roots, the Callaway Siblings and the Quiet Rise of Prism Compliance. I sat with my coffee and read it twice. Craig Fowler was a competent writer. The piece was structured as a profile of collaborative founding, two siblings, different strengths, a shared vision that grew out of family conversations. Garrett was quoted 4 times. I was quoted 0 times because Fowler had emailed my company's press address 6 days earlier and the inquiry had been routed to our communications manager, who had flagged it as low priority and not escalated it. I was going to have a conversation with our communications manager about escalation protocols. But that was for later. Garrett's quotes were careful. He never said he owned equity. He never claimed a title. He used words like foundational conversations and early strategic input, and we always knew this was going somewhere, the language of a man who had been coached, or who had coached himself, to stay just far enough from a provable lie that it felt like a matter of interpretation. At 6:11 a.m., Simone's letter to the journal's editor had already been delivered to the editor's personal email, his managing editor's email, and the paper's legal counsel. I found this out because Simone sent me the delivery confirmation at 6:13 with a note that said, "They know what the record says. What they do with that is their problem now." By 6:45, my mother had texted me a link to the article with a single line beneath it, "So proud of both of you." I put the phone face down on the counter. I left it there for 11 minutes. Then I picked it up, screenshotted the text, and forwarded it to Simone's file folder without responding. Underscore 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 underscore. Owen Bryce called at 8. He was already in the office, which I had come to understand was just where Owen lived. "I've seen the piece," he said. "Talk to me." "It's inaccurate. Simone has already been in contact with the paper. The Soul Inventor documentation is airtight and has been on public record since year 1. Does your brother have anything in writing that creates a colorable claim? He has informal emails from year 1. None of them reference equity, ownership, title, or contribution to IP. Simone reviewed them last night." Owen was quiet for a moment. I could hear him turning something over in his mind the way accountants turn over numbers, methodically, without hurry. "Dana, I need to know before we go any further. Is there any scenario in which this surfaces something the underwriting team doesn't already know about?" "No." "You're certain?" "Owen, I have been building this paper trail for 8 years specifically so that the answer to that question would always be no." A pause. Then something that wasn't quite a laugh but was adjacent to one. "All right. I'm going to loop in outside counsel and we're going to put one additional disclosure paragraph in the S1 amendment. Clean, factual, 2 sentences. It will confirm sole founder status and note that no co-inventorship claims exist on record. The SEC will want to see we addressed it proactively." "Fine. Simone's already drafting it, isn't she?" It wasn't really a question. "She sent me a draft at 7:15, I said. "Of course she did." He paused again. "We're still on for Thursday." I exhaled slowly. "We're still on for Thursday." After I hung up, I stood at the window for a long time. The city below was doing its ordinary Wednesday things. A woman walking a dog in a yellow coat. A food truck setting up on the corner. The completely indifferent machinery of regular life continuing without any awareness that something I had built for 8 years was 2 days from being real in a way it had never quite been real before. My phone buzzed. A text from Miles. "Garrett posted on Facebook this morning." He linked the article. Caption says, "Proud of what we built." His friends are commenting. A lot of them. I read it twice. I did not reply to Miles. I opened the Facebook app, which I rarely used, found Garrett's post, and screenshotted the entire thread. 42 comments. 3 of them from people I recognized, cousins, family friends, a woman named Patty who had known my mother since before I was born. "You should be so proud." A real family success story. Garrett, you always believed in her. I saved every screenshot in a folder I had been maintaining since year 2. The folder was labeled simply, Record. I closed the app. I called Simone. I saw the post, she said before I could speak. What do I do? Nothing. You document and you do nothing. Dana, I need you to stay completely off social media for the next 48 hours. No responses, no corrections, no subtle posts that someone could interpret as a reaction. You are a founder 2 days from an IPO and you are above this in every technical and legal sense. Let the record do the talking. My mother is going to call. She's going to call, Simone agreed. And when she does, you're going to be warm and brief and give her nothing to work with. You're not lying. You're not performing. You're just not handing her anything she can carry back to Garrett. I thought about the 11 emails. I thought about the word we. He's been planning this, I said. It wasn't really a question either. Simone was quiet for a moment, the careful quiet, not the thinking quiet. Garrett has been watching you build something for 8 years, Dana. He's watched every funding round. He's watched the press mentions. He was at that Christmas dinner when you tried to explain what you were building and nobody listened. She paused. Men like your brother don't plan exactly. They wait. And when the moment gets big enough, the waiting starts to feel like a plan. I didn't answer right away. Outside, the woman in the yellow coat was coming back the other direction now, the dog pulling hard towards something on the sidewalk she couldn't see from where I was standing. He used to teach me things, I said. It came out quieter than I intended. When we were kids. He taught me to read a balance sheet. He used to bring home these old annual reports from companies and we'd go through them together at the kitchen table. I know, Simone said. You told me that once. A long time ago. I just want to make sure I'm remembering him correctly. Both versions. You can do both, she said. You can remember both and still do what needs to be done. My mother called at 11:47. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to the message twice, standing at the counter with my eyes closed. Her voice was warm, and that was the hardest part. She wasn't performing warmth, she genuinely felt it, because she genuinely believed the article was true, because Garrett had told her it was, and she had needed it to be. Dana, baby, did you see? Craig's piece is getting so much traction. I think this is going to be so good for the launch. Call me when you can. We're all just so proud. I forwarded the voicemail to Simone. I labeled it, Record. Then I opened the S1 amendment draft Simone had sent at 7:15, sat down at the kitchen table, and read every word of it twice. It was 2 paragraphs. 41 words. It was the cleanest thing I had read all week, and somewhere inside it was everything the article wasn't. My father called at 9 the next morning. One day before the bell. He didn't lead with Garrett this time. He led with me, which was the tell. When my father opened a conversation by asking how I was doing, he was building towards something he knew I wouldn't like. He had been a corporate attorney for 31 years. He knew how to lay a foundation. I'm fine, Dad. Busy. I imagine. A pause. Dana, I want you to know that your mother and I are proud of what you've built. Whatever else is happening right now, that's real. Thank you. I also want you to be careful about how this plays out publicly. Garrett he's having a hard time with how the narrative is being framed. He feels like the correction language Simone's firm sent to the journal was designed to embarrass him. I sat down slowly. The letter stated the public record. That's all it did. He has a family, Dana. He has Jess. He has a reputation in Columbus. Dad. I kept my voice level. He gave an interview 3 days before my company's IPO claiming he co-founded it. I didn't ask him to do that. I didn't know he was doing it. The letter Simone sent didn't embarrass him, the interview embarrassed him. Silence. The long kind, the kind my father used when he was deciding whether to push or retreat. I had been reading that silence my whole life. He says he has more than the emails, my father said finally. I went very still. What does that mean? He says there's a conversation. Early on. He says you called him and walked him through the architecture. That he gave you feedback that shaped the direction of the product. I thought back carefully through 8 years of memory. There had been a call. Year 1, February, I had been stuck on a UI problem and had called Garrett because he had worked briefly in product at a software company in his late 20s, before the first failed startup. We had talked for 22 minutes. He had suggested making the dashboard more visual. I had thanked him and then not implemented the suggestion because the product was not consumer-facing and visual dashboards were not what compliance officers needed. There was a phone call, I said. 22 minutes. I asked him about dashboard design. He gave me a general opinion. I didn't use it. He says it was more than that. What he says and what happened are two different things, and only one of them is in the documentation. Another silence. Then, quieter, Dana. Is there any version of this where you could give him something? Not equity. Not a title. Just acknowledgement. Something that lets him save face. For your mother, if nothing else. I closed my eyes for a moment. I thought about what it had cost me to build the thing I had built. The sublet bedroom. The savings account drawn down to 4 months of runway. The December I had worked every day including Christmas because a major client integration was breaking and I had one engineer and she was sick. The years of making myself small at family dinners so Garrett's latest idea could breathe. Dad, I said. I love you. And I am not going to do that. He exhaled. Then I don't know how to help you with your brother. I'm not asking you to help me with my brother. I'm asking you to not help him with me. He didn't have an answer for that. We hung up a few minutes later with the conversation unfinished in the way our conversations had always been unfinished, trailing off into a politeness that stood in for everything neither of us could say directly. I wrote the time on the notepad. 9:34 a.m. Simone was at my apartment by 11 with a messenger bag, a coffee she had already half finished, and the focused energy of someone who had been awake since 5 and considered this normal. She sat at my kitchen table and opened her laptop and we went through the amendment language one final time. Owen's outside counsel had tightened the second paragraph overnight. It was cleaner. 37 words now instead of 41. It files at 2, Simone said. Owen confirmed this morning. Once it's in the system, it's public record alongside everything else. She looked at me over the top of her screen. How are you holding up? I'm fine. You said that yesterday. It was true yesterday too. She studied me for a moment. Simone had a way of looking at you that felt less like scrutiny and more like attention, the kind of attention that didn't require you to perform being okay. Your father called you. 9:30 this morning. And? Garrett apparently has a claim about a phone call. A product conversation from year 1. I told her the details. She listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I had always trusted about her. 22 minutes, she said when I finished. Do you have phone records from that period? I had already thought of this. I switched carriers in year 2. I'm not sure how far back the records go. I'll request them. It probably won't matter, a 22-minute informal call doesn't establish co-inventorship under any standard I'm aware of, but I want it documented either way. She typed something, closed that window, opened another. Dana, I want to tell you something and I want you to hear it as a fact, not as reassurance. Okay. Your brother cannot touch this company. Not legally, not technically, not on the record. The documentation you built over 8 years is one of the cleanest founding structures I have seen in 15 years of practice. Most founders don't file the IP assignment the same day as the entity formation. You did. Most founders don't get a notarized copy of the patent cover page into their personal files. You did. She paused. He can make noise. He is making noise. But noise is not a claim. And the market opens tomorrow morning regardless of the noise. I looked at my hands on the table. I know. Say it like you know it. He can't touch the company. Right. She closed her laptop. Now. Your mother's been calling you. I haven't picked up. Pick up tonight. Be warm, be brief, give her nothing. She's going to be watching tomorrow and you want that to be uncomplicated. I nodded. Then, after a moment, Simone, how did you know? 8 years ago when I called you from that gas station in Gary. You told me to file the IP assignment the same day. Most attorneys wouldn't have led with that. She was quiet for a moment. Something moved across her face that I didn't see often. Because I had a client once who didn't, she said. And by the time she needed it, the window was closed. She picked up her coffee. File everything before you need it. That's the only rule that matters. Garrett called at 417 from a number I didn't recognize. I picked up because Miles had been using a new number recently and I hadn't saved it yet, and for 1/2 second before I heard the voice I thought it might be him. Dana. Garrett's voice was controlled. More controlled than I had expected, which told me he had been preparing for this call the way our father prepared for calls, knowing what he wanted to accomplish before he dialed. Garrett. I want to talk before tomorrow. Before it gets bigger than it needs to be. Okay. Talk. I'm not trying to take anything from you. I want you to know that. The interview I wasn't trying to make a claim. I was trying to tell our story. The real version. The one where I was actually there. I waited. You called me, he said. February, year 1. You were stuck and you called me and we talked through the whole architecture for almost half an hour and you know that conversation mattered. You know it did. We talked about dashboard design for 22 minutes, Garrett. It was more than that. What do you want? I asked. Quietly, without anger. Just the question. A pause. Long enough that I could hear something in the background, a television, a door, the ambient sound of wherever he was. I want people to know I was part of this. That's all. I'm your brother. We grew up in the same house. Mom and Dad put everything into us and you built something incredible and his voice shifted. Something in it went unsteady. I just want to have been part of it. I sat with that for a moment. The part of me that had grown up in that same house felt it, the pull of it, the old longing underneath his words that I recognized because I had my own version of it. You weren't part of building it, Garrett, I said. I'm sorry. You weren't. He was quiet for a long time after that. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. The unsteadiness was gone, replaced by something flatter and more deliberate. I have the emails, Dana. And I have people who will say I was involved. I just want you to think about what it looks like if this gets messier than it needs to be. I picked up my pen. I wrote the time. 4:31 p.m. I'll let Simone know you called, I said. And I hung up. I sat at the table without moving for several minutes. Then I got up, went to my desk, and pulled out the slim folder I kept in the bottom drawer, the one with the original patent cover page, the founder agreement, the IP assignment, all of it notarized and organized in the order Simone had specified 8 years ago, a system so clean and deliberate it almost looked inevitable in retrospect. I put the folder on the table. I didn't open it. I just left it there while I made dinner, because sometimes the most steadying thing in the world is knowing exactly where the document is. The bell rang in 18 hours. And my brother had just made his last move without realizing it was his last one. Simone called at 7 that evening. I was standing at the stove making pasta because Simone had told me to eat real food the night before a major event and I had found over the years that following her practical instructions was almost always the right call. He recorded the call, she said. I turned the burner down. What? Garrett recorded your 4:30 conversation. His attorney, and yes, he has retained an attorney, a guy named Dennis Hartwell out of Columbus, civil litigation background. His attorney sent a letter to my office at 6:15 this evening. They're asserting an oral co-founder agreement based on the February phone call and today's conversation as supporting evidence. They're threatening to file for an injunction to delay the IPO pending an equity review. I set the spoon down on the counter. Can they get one? No. Her voice was completely flat. Dana, I want to be very precise with you right now. They cannot get an injunction. A judge would need to find a substantial likelihood of success on the merits, and there is no universe in which an informal phone call about dashboard design establishes a co-founder agreement against 8 years of sole inventor documentation. Hartwell knows this. He filed a letter, not a motion. This is a pressure tactic, not a legal strategy. But the timing. The timing is the point. Yes. He's betting that the threat of disruption the night before bell ringing is enough to make you give him something to make it go away. She paused. Is it? No. I know. I'm asking anyway because I need to hear you say it clearly. No, I said again. It is not. Good. Then here's what happens next. I respond to Hartwell tonight, 2 paragraphs, firm letterhead, attaching the complete founding documentation package. I will note that any filing based on these facts would constitute an improper use of legal process given the public record, and that we reserve all rights to respond accordingly. Owen's outside counsel is already aware. The underwriters have been briefed. She stopped. Dana, the amendment is on file with the SEC. The documentation has been on public record since year 1. Your brother waited until the last possible moment because that was his only leverage, the timing. We have removed the timing as a variable. I stood at the counter and looked at the pasta going cold on the stove and thought about Garrett at the kitchen table in Columbus when we were kids, walking me through annual reports, patient and specific in a way he almost never was about anything else. He recorded me, I said quietly. He did. He called from an unknown number so I'd pick up and he recorded it. Yes. I let that sit for a moment. Not with anger exactly, something quieter and more final than anger. The feeling of a last door closing on a room you had been keeping open for a long time without admitting to yourself that you were doing it. Okay, I said. Send the letter. Already drafting it. Go eat your dinner. Set an alarm for 5. Wear something you feel like yourself in. A pause. You did the work, Dana. All of it, for 8 years, in the right order. Tomorrow is just the day the record becomes visible. I reheated the pasta. I ate it standing at the counter. I went to bed at 10 and lay in the dark listening to the city and thinking about almost nothing, which was its own kind of preparation. Underscore 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 underscore. The alarm went off at 5. The city outside was the particular dark blue of early morning in January, the color of something that hasn't decided yet what it's going to be. I showered. I made coffee. I stood in front of my closet for longer than I usually would have, which Simone would have said was normal and Owen would have said was inefficient, and both of them would have been right. I chose a charcoal blazer I had bought 2 years earlier for a board presentation, dark trousers, a white shirt, and a pair of black loafers I had resold twice because I had always believed in keeping things that worked. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror for a moment. 36 years old. 8 years. 1 company. Sole founder. I picked up my phone. Simone had sent a message at 4:47, Hartwell has not filed. He won't. Car picks you up at 7. I'll meet you at the exchange. I said back a single word, ready. My mother had called twice overnight. My father once. I had 3 texts from Garrett from a number I now recognized, sent between midnight and 2 a.m., each one a variation of the same message: "Call me, we can still figure this out, don't do this to the family." I read all 3. I put the phone in my coat pocket. I did not reply. Miles had texted at 6:30, flying in on the red-eye. "I'll be there." I wrote back, "You didn't have to do that." He wrote back, "Yeah, I did." Underscore 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 underscore. The car arrived at 7. The driver held the door and said good morning, and I got in and watched Chicago slide past the windows as we moved toward the highway, the city still mostly asleep, a few runners on the lakefront path moving through the cold with the focused expressions of people who had somewhere specific to be inside themselves. I thought about the apartment in Wicker Park I had worked from in year 1. The folding table I had used as a desk. The integration I had built alone over 3 weeks in February that had become the core of the product's first enterprise contract. I thought about the morning I had signed the founder agreement on Simone's conference table, and she had dated it in her precise handwriting and slid it into a manila folder and said, "This is the first document in the file, don't lose the file." I had not lost the file. Underscore 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 underscore. The NYSE floor was louder than I expected and quieter than I expected simultaneously, loud with the physical reality of the space, the size of it, the decades of accumulated weight of every transaction that had ever moved through it, and quiet in the specific way that places are quiet when what's happening inside them is real. Simone was already there when I arrived, standing near the guest area in a navy suit with her reading glasses pushed up on her head, talking to Owen Bryce, who was in a dark blazer and looked like a man who considered this a Tuesday. Miles was there too. He had found a corner near the wall and was standing with his hands in his pockets, looking simultaneously out of place and exactly right, and when he saw me he didn't wave, he just nodded once, the way our grandmother used to nod when something had gone the way it was supposed to. Owen shook my hand. "Clean open," he said. "No filings, no motions, no noise on the wire." "We're good." "We're good," I said. The team gathered near the podium, Simone on my left, Owen to her left, and behind us 4 of the earliest employees, Rena, who had been employee number 1 and had taken the role at a salary that required her to keep freelancing on the side for a year, Carter, who had built the first client integration by himself in a rented server room in Evanston, Priya, who had closed our 3rd enterprise contract by walking into a meeting where the client had already decided to go elsewhere, and Marcus, who had designed the compliance dashboard that was now running in 41 states. I looked at the 4 of them behind me. Carter was trying to look professional and mostly succeeding. Priya was completely composed. Rena had her eyes slightly too bright in a way I recognized because I felt the same thing. Marcus was looking at the floor of the exchange like he was trying to memorize it. These were the people who had built it. At 9:28 the CNBC anchor, a woman in a burgundy blazer with an earpiece and the practiced calm of someone who did this every week, said my name into the camera. Dana Calloway, sole founder and CEO of Prism Compliance, a regulatory technology firm, priced its IPO last night at $16 a share. I heard the number and then I stopped hearing the words because the bell was in my hand and the floor was watching, and for one specific second I was 28 years old in a gas station parking lot outside Gary, Indiana, calling a number I had saved from a conference, not knowing if she'd pick up. She had picked up. The bell rang at 9:30. Confetti, white and silver, the company's colors because Rena had suggested them in year 2 and I had never changed them. Somewhere on a television in a living room in Columbus, Ohio, the ticker was running. Simone put her hand briefly on my shoulder. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. My phone was in my coat pocket. I had not looked at it since the car. I left it there. Owen leaned over. 16 open. Watch the first 30 minutes. He looked at his screen. His expression did something that on a less controlled face would have been a smile. Actually. Watch the first 5. I watched the first 5. Prism Compliance opened at 16 and moved to 1940 in the first 4 minutes of trading. By the time the opening volatility settled, it was holding at 22. Carter said something behind me that I didn't catch, but that made Marcus laugh, and that sound, two people who had worked in a rented server room in Evanston laughing on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, was the thing that almost undid me. I held it together. I was getting good at that. But somewhere underneath the composure, something that had been wound tight for 8 years was very slowly, finally, beginning to release. Miles found me on the small balcony off the VIP room at 10:14. The trading floor noise was muffled out here. Broad Street below was doing its ordinary morning things, a courier on a bicycle, a woman in a long coat eating something from a paper bag, the indifferent mechanical movement of a city that had watched companies go public on this street for 200 years and found it neither remarkable nor unremarkable, just one more thing that happened. I was leaning against the railing with my coat on, watching my breath in the cold air. Miles stood beside me for a moment without saying anything, which was one of the things I had always valued about him. He had learned it from his mother, who had learned it from their grandmother, who had believed that silence was a form of respect that most people were too uncomfortable to offer. "Your dad was watching," he said finally. "I called my mom after the bell. She was at your parents' house this morning," said Uncle Frank. Sat in his chair the whole segment without moving. When it was over he put his coffee down and just sat there. I didn't say anything. "Your mom left the room before it ended." I looked out at the street. A pigeon landed on the railing 6 feet to my left and regarded me briefly before deciding I wasn't interesting. "How's Jess?" Miles glanced at me. "Why?" "Because she's been married to my brother for 9 years and she found out 2 days ago that he recorded a phone call to use against his sister the night before her IPO. I'm wondering how she's doing with that." Miles was quiet for a moment. "Des talked to her yesterday. She didn't know about the attorney. Garrett didn't tell her he'd retained Hartwell until after Simone's response letter went out. She found out when he did." He paused. "She's not doing great." I nodded slowly. "She doesn't need to be involved in any of this. Whatever happens between her and Garrett is between them." "I know." I told her that. We stood for another minute. Below us a cab stopped and 2 people got out and the city absorbed them without comment. "Dana." Miles turned slightly toward me. "He said something to my mom this morning. After your segment aired. She called me from the driveway because she didn't want to say it in the house." He stopped. "He said you always knew you were going to win. And then he said he just didn't want it to be against him." I had been ready for a lot of things from Garrett today. I had not been ready for that. I stood with it for a moment, that specific sentence, and felt it do the thing that only true things do, land somewhere deeper than the surface and stay there. "He taught me how to read a balance sheet," I said. "When I was 11. He used to bring home these annual reports from companies and we'd sit at the kitchen table and go through them." I paused. "He was patient about it. He was good at it." "I remember," Miles said. "I don't know when that version of him stopped being the main version." I looked down at the street. "Probably gradually. Probably in pieces I didn't see." Miles didn't try to answer that, which was correct. Some things don't need an answer, they just need to be said out loud to someone who will hold them carefully. We went back inside after a few more minutes. The VIP room had thinned. Rena was on her phone in the corner, already back in operational mode, which I recognized as her way of handling large emotional moments. Move immediately to the next task. Carter and Marcus were talking to an investor relations contact near the window. Priya was eating a croissant with the same focused attention she gave to contract language. Simone was at the long table, red pen in hand, reviewing something on paper. She looked up when I came in. 17 texts from your mother, I said. I know. Don't answer them yet. She set the pen down. Sit down for a minute. I sat. Hartwell sent a follow-up communication this morning, she said. After the bell. After the open. She said it the way she said things that were already resolved, factually, without drama. He's withdrawing the threatened action. His letter cites insufficient grounds to proceed given the public record. She paused. In other words, he told Garrett the same thing I told you 3 days ago and Garrett finally heard it. Okay. The Midwest Business Journal published a correction at 9:52. I'll send you the link. They updated the piece online and added an editor's note citing the founder documentation. They also removed 2 of Garrett's quotes. She looked at me steadily. The record corrected itself, Dana. That's what records do when they're built properly. I sat with that for a moment. 8 years of building something that could correct itself without me having to raise my voice. Owen came over and shook my hand again, a real handshake this time, not a professional one, and said the early trading numbers were strong and the institutional orders were holding and that the first day close was looking like it was going to matter. He said it the way Owen said everything, without excess, but there was something underneath the precision that I understood was his version of celebration. After he walked away, Simone said, "Go call your mother. You just said not to answer her texts." That was before the correction published. Call her now. Be warm. Be brief. Don't explain anything. Let her tell you she's proud and say thank you and get off the phone. I stepped into a quieter corner of the room and called. My mother answered on the first ring. Her voice had the specific quality it got when she had been crying and had stopped and was now trying to sound like she hadn't been. I knew that quality the way I knew the sound of the house at night when I was a child, not consciously catalogued, just stored somewhere fundamental. Dana. A breath. I watched the whole thing. I know, Mom. You looked so, she stopped. I didn't know how big it was. I didn't understand how big. It's okay. I should have been there. Her voice shifted, went thinner. I want you to know that whatever your brother did, that was not, I didn't know about the attorney, Dana. I want you to know that. Mom. I kept my voice level and warm. It's okay. I'm okay. The company is okay. A silence. The kind where a person is deciding whether to say the next thing or let it rest. She let it rest, which surprised me, and I found that I was grateful for it. I'm proud of you, she said finally. Just that. Thank you, I said. I'll call you this week. I got off the phone and stood in the corner for a moment with the device in my hand. 36 years old. The things your mother's voice can still do to you regardless of everything else, that was something nobody warned you about and there was probably no documentation that could prepare you for it. Underscore 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 underscore. The first day closed at 26:40. Owen texted the number to me at 4:03 with no additional commentary, which was itself a form of commentary. Simone sent a single line, 94 people kept their equity. Go home. I went home. The apartment was quiet and exactly as I had left it that morning, coffee cup rinsed and upside down on the drying rack, notepad on the counter with the times I had written over the past 4 days in my own handwriting, the folder of founding documents still on the kitchen table where I had left it the night before. I had not put it away. I was not sure why. I stood at the window for a while. The city below was moving into evening, the particular Chicago dusk that turns the lake a flat pewter color and the buildings a warm amber at the edges. I had lived in this apartment for 4 years. I had signed the lease 6 weeks after closing the Series B, when it became clear that the company was going to survive and that I was allowed to stop subletting rooms to make the rent. My phone had 41 unread messages. I read the ones from Simone, Owen, Rena, Miles, and Priya. I read a brief one from Carter that said only, "We did something real today." I read a text from Jess that said, "I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted to say I saw it and I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." I sat with that one for a long time. Then I wrote back, "You don't have anything to be sorry for. Take care of yourself." I did not read the messages from Garrett. I moved them to a folder. I did not read the 7 remaining texts from my mother or the 2 from my father. I made tea. I stood at the counter with the mug warm between both hands and thought about what Simone had said 8 years ago at a conference, the first time I had heard her speak. The most expensive thing a founder can do is build without documentation. The second most expensive thing is document without consistency. Do both, in that order, from day one. I had written it on the back of the conference program and kept the program in the founding documents folder for 8 years. It was still there, behind the patent cover page, slightly creased. The folder was still on the table. I picked it up, carried it to the desk, and put it in the bottom drawer where it lived. Then I closed the drawer. Not because the work was done, the work was never done, but because this particular chapter of it was. My father called at 8 that evening. I almost didn't pick up. Then I did, because I had been choosing almost for a long time and I was tired of it. "Dana." His voice was different from the calls earlier in the week. The lawyerly evenness was gone. What was underneath it was something older and quieter and considerably harder to know what to do with. "I watched this morning. I watched all of it." "I know, Dad. I have been trying to think of the right thing to say since 9:30 this morning." A pause. "I haven't found it yet." "You don't have to find it tonight," I said. Another silence. The longest one we had shared in years. "Your brother is going to need some time," he said. "We all are, I think." "I know. Dana." He stopped. Started again. "I remember when you were 8 years old and you asked me to explain what a corporation was. Do you remember that?" I did remember. We had been in his study. He had a copy of the state corporate code on the shelf and he had taken it down and shown me the relevant section and explained it in terms I could follow. I had asked questions for 45 minutes. He had answered every one. "I remember," I said. "You were the most precise 8-year-old I have ever encountered," he said. And then, quietly, I should have paid closer attention to what that meant. I didn't answer right away. Outside the window the lake was dark and the city lights were doing their ordinary evening work, and somewhere in Columbus my father was sitting in whatever room he had retreated to and saying the closest thing to an apology I had probably ever heard from him. "Dad," I said. "Get some sleep." He said goodnight. I hung up. I stood at the window for a long time after that, holding the phone, not looking at anything in particular, just breathing in the way you breathe when something large and long-held has finally shifted even slightly from where it has always been. 3 weeks later I drove to Columbus on a Tuesday. Not for a holiday. Not for an occasion. I drove because Simone had told me to handle the remaining family communication in person rather than by letter, and because I had learned over 8 years to trust her instincts about timing the way I trusted her instincts about documentation, which was completely and without reservation. I left Chicago at 6 in the morning. The drive was 4.5 hours on a gray January day, the highway flat and quiet, the kind of drive that gives you nothing to look at and everything to think about. I stopped once for coffee outside of Indianapolis and sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, not because I needed the rest but because I needed to decide exactly what I was going to say. I had a folder on the passenger seat. 3 documents. A notarized copy of the Sole Inventor patent cover page. A printed copy of the Midwest Business Journal correction with the editor's note. And a single-page letter from Simone's firm addressed to my parents jointly, written in the clean declarative language Simone used when she wanted to be understood without being argued with, requesting as a matter of corporate record that family members refrain from referencing the company or its founding in any public forum for the following 12 months. Not a threat. Not an ultimatum. A documented request on letterhead. I had read all 3 documents twice in the parking lot. Then I had gotten back on the highway. Underscore 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 underscore. The house looked the same. It always looked the same, white clapboard, black shutters, the kind of house that had been maintained so consistently for so long that it had stopped aging, or seemed to have. My mother's car was in the driveway. My father's was in the garage. Preston's was not there, which Miles had told me to expect. Garrett had moved into a short-term rental in Dublin while he and Jess worked through what came next. Jess had a lawyer. Miles had told me that too, without elaboration, which was the correct amount. I sat in the car for 19 minutes. I was not afraid exactly. It was more specific than fear, the feeling of being about to do something that could not be undone, not because it was irreversible but because it was true, and true things have a permanence that reversible ones don't. Then I got out of the car. My mother came to the door before I knocked. She had been watching from the window, which she had always done. She had a particular awareness of the driveway that none of us had ever been able to explain except as the specific vigilance of a woman who had always needed to know who was coming and in what mood. She looked at me for a moment without speaking. She looked tired in a way that wasn't about sleep. She stepped back and let me in. My father was in the library. He was sitting in his chair with a book open on his knee that he was not reading. He looked up when I came in and did not stand, which meant he was either being careful or he was simply tired too. I decided it didn't matter which. I put the folder on the dining room table. I didn't open it. I just set it there with the edge aligned to the corner of the table the way Simone had taught me to present documents, without drama, without explanation, simply present and available. My mother came in from the hallway and stood in the doorway between the dining room and the kitchen, which was where she had always stood when she didn't know whether to enter or retreat. "What is this?" she asked. "The patent cover page. The journal correction. And a letter from Simone's firm." I kept my voice even. "You don't need to do anything with it tonight. I just wanted you to have the physical copies." My mother looked at the folder. Something moved across her face that I didn't entirely know how to read, not anger, not sorrow exactly, something in between those things that was its own specific emotion. "Dana." Her voice was careful. "I want you to know that I love your brother. I will always love your brother. I know that, Mom. And I love you." She stopped. "I know that I have not always." She stopped again. "Tried a different direction. I know that things have not always been balanced. In this family. Between you and Garrett." I waited. "I'm not going to stand here and pretend I handled everything right." Her voice was thinner now, and I recognized the specific effort it was taking her to say this, not because she was performing it, but because my mother had always found admission harder than accusation, and this was as close as she was likely to get. "I'm just asking you not to disappear on us completely. Whatever you need to do legally, whatever the letter says, I understand. But don't disappear." I looked at her for a long moment. 36 years of knowing this woman. The ways she had failed me and the ways she had not, and how those two things existed simultaneously without canceling each other out. "I'm not disappearing," I said. "I'm just done being the one who makes myself smaller so Garrett has more room." She didn't answer that. But she didn't argue with it either, which was its own kind of answer. My father spoke from the library doorway. He had stood up at some point without me noticing. He was holding the book closed at his side, and he looked at me with an expression I had seen on his face only a few times in my life, at my college graduation, when he had arrived 20 minutes late and found me already in the procession, and had stood at the edge of the crowd with an expression that I had not known how to interpret at 22 but understood better now. "The letter is reasonable," he said. "We'll respect it." That was all. For words of acknowledgement in my father's precise diction, the diction of a man who had spent 31 years choosing language carefully because he understood that words, once placed on the record, stayed there. I picked up the folder. I left the documents on the table. I said goodbye and drove back to Chicago through the gray January afternoon, the highway quiet in both directions, the lake invisible from here but present somewhere to the north in the way that large things are present even when you cannot see them. Underscore 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 underscore. 6 months later, Prism Compliance hired its 37th employee. Her name was Audrey Sims. She was 26, 2 years out of Northwestern, and she had sent a cold email to our recruiting address that had been so precisely written and so absent of unnecessary words that I had forwarded it to Simone with the note, "Hire this person." Simone had written back, "Already scheduled her." Audrey's onboarding packet was 14 pages. On the first page, in a small outlined box, were 2 rules printed in 12-point font. Rule 1, sign your IP assignment agreement on your first day. Rule 2, no one in your life is exempt from Rule 1. Audrey read both rules, looked up, and said, "Is the second rule about family?" "Primarily," I said. She nodded once, the way people nod when something confirms what they already suspected, and signed the agreement, and went to her desk and started working. And I watched her go and thought about Simone at that conference 15 years ago saying document everything, in the right order, from day one, and how I had written it on the back of a program and kept it for 8 years without fully understanding that the thing I was really documenting was my own right to exist exactly as I was. Underscore 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 underscore. I hosted New Year's Eve that year in Chicago. 8 people. Simone and her husband. Miles and his wife. Rena. Carter. Priya. And Audrey, because she had mentioned in passing that her plans had fallen through, and I had learned something in the past year about not leaving people to navigate large evenings alone when there was a table with room. I cooked a roast chicken from a farm in Wisconsin that Rena had found. Potatoes. Good bread. Wine that was not trying to prove anything. The conversation was easy in the way that conversations are easy when the people around the table have either built something together or have enough history to sit in silence without it feeling like a problem. At 11:58 I went to the kitchen and came back with a bottle I had kept in the back of the refrigerator since the morning of the IPO, the same bottle Owen had opened on the exchange floor, a twin of it, bought that afternoon and set aside for this specific night. Simone raised her glass. "To Rule 1, she said. Everyone laughed. Audrey laughed too, half a second behind, catching the reference and landing on it. Midnight came. Somewhere outside, fireworks over the lake, distant and soft, the kind that reach you as sound before light. I checked my phone at 12:01. A text from Miles, "Happy New Year." One from Jess, "2026 is going to be better. Thank you for everything." One from my father, which surprised me, 3 words, "Proud of you." I read it twice. I put the phone in my coat pocket. I did not respond that night. Some things deserve more than a midnight text, and the right words were worth waiting for. I went back to the table. The chicken was still warm. The candles had burned down to the holders. Audrey was laughing at something Carter had said. Simone was watching the room with the quiet satisfaction of a person who had done their work correctly and was allowing herself to know it. I sat down. I poured the last of the wine. Outside the fireworks were still going, small, far, persistent. Here's what I would tell you, if you asked me what I learned. Not the business lesson, not the legal strategy, you can hire someone for those. The thing underneath. For a long time I believed that the price of belonging to a family was making yourself legible to them. Shrinking into a shape they could recognize. I spent years being the version of myself that fit inside their understanding, and what I got for it was a seat at the table that was never quite mine and a sense of myself that was always slightly blurred at the edges. The thing I know now is this: documentation is not coldness. Filing the paperwork is not the opposite of love. Knowing where your documents are, having signed them in the right order, building something that cannot be taken from you, that is not armor against your family. That is just the work of being a person who knows what belongs to her. You are allowed to love people and still refuse to let them rewrite what you built. You are allowed to leave the folder on the table and walk out without slamming the door. You are allowed to check your phone at midnight and feel something uncomplicated and good. I felt it that night. I put the phone in my pocket and sat back down, and the chicken was warm and the people around the table were people I had chosen, and outside the city was doing its ordinary work of continuing, and for the first time in a long time I was not making myself smaller for anyone. That is the whole story. No documents left unfiled. No loops left open. If this one stayed with you, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button right now. We put out a new story every single week and you do not want to miss what is coming next. Drop a comment below and tell me, what is the thing your family called too much that turned out to be exactly enough? I read every single one. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. I will see you in the next story.